there's different types of symbiotism. Symbiotism? What's it called in English? There's a mutualism, and etc. Parasitism maybe even can be considered symbiotism. What type of symbiotism is love? It's because you ended that you ended with that. Because I've always been struggling as a biologist. I'm always struggling as well understanding what is symbiotism.
I put it there to trigger people to think what it is because I don't have an answer. What is love?
Okay.
So could I ask a question? So just a clarification. So several of you use terms acclimation, then adjustment and adaptation. What's the difference between them?
Well, adaptation is something that happens through evolution, so changes in either genomics or the epigenetics.
So that is between the generations.
Yeah. I mean, this is how I understand it for like plants. Of course, when we talk about then let's say bacteria or something else, then that goes beyond. Acclimation is something that can happen through the lifetime of an organism.
Okay. So what is then the difference to adaptation or adjustment?
Adjustment, that's a common word then, I'd say. So then you can use adjustment to mean any kind of getting more used to a thing. I don't think it has this kind of critical definition.
Okay. And what is then the difference to learning?
Yeah. Learning doesn't... Well, yeah. Maybe human people can disagree, but I would say learning does not happen in the body, but it happens in the brain. So I don't think we can say there is a learning in, let's say, a plant that doesn't have a brain or a nervous system. So what happens in
still, I think that I have seen cases published that, for example, people which have brain injuries, they can have the simplest learning still happening. Because at least... So I'm just interested in the notions because let's say now what is happening is that these kind of, let's say, biological terms are also going to the material science because there's artificial intelligence and all the materials, synthetic materials and biological materials are merging. That's why I was kind of, let's say, trying to have a little bit clarification from a real biology expert.
It's actually a very good question because I've been thinking about it as well. In our experiments, we did this experiment and we took the samples from outside, and before doing the experiment, we were suggested to acclimate the samples in lab conditions to remove the memory of the field. So, do plants have memory? How is it stored? Where is it stored? But this is clear. If you take sample from outside, it's adapted to outside conditions, and you give it time in the lab conditions, it can adapt and behave differently.
Okay. So I fully agree that, let's say, in all of the learning procedures, there's a triggerable memory. And so to erase the memory, I think it is important. Yeah.
I think there's also like famous examples in biology where you take a flatworm and you teach a flatworm, like it's a very basic organism, and you teach it something simple like avoid water or avoid some environment, avoid salts or something. You give it some trigger, you can shock it with electricity a little bit to teach it that, okay, electricity or this environment is bad for you. You cut the worm in half. And it's a species that actually can regenerate. And you cut it in a way that you remove its head. The head kind of grows back and it remembers the triggers, that it remembers somehow, even without the head, even without the basic brain it does have. It still remembers the triggers that I cannot approach that danger that I have to stay away from it. So there must be something more complex. And if a flatworm can do it, why cannot we? Like at some point, at some level, like we don't know how to define it, and that's maybe a question as well. If that's acclimation, if that's adaptation, if that's learning, we don't even know what we're looking at. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, hi all. I'm sorry, I'm going to also just ask the bioscientists this question. So Pauliina is still a bit left out. But I was wondering if each of you could kind of touch on the relationship of your system with other organisms. So I guess for Erik, that's, of course, I'm interested in the microbiome part of your data. Do you use that? Who uses that at like your biobank? What is being done with it? I guess for Kaisa, I was really wondering, because I know that some trees have close symbiosis with fungi, for example. How does that relate to the urban versus less urban situations, and also maybe also the macroorganisms, like you have more squirrels in a park or something? Like, is anyone studying this kind of thing? And I guess also for Kristiina, like how do the lichens interact with the other organisms? Is there some importance to that, for example? Like, I guess they live in quite open environments, but what else is living there? Like reindeers grazing on them is, I guess, the classic example we think of in Finland. But yeah, so that's basically my question, relationship of other organisms around your main organism.
I guess I'll start then. So yeah, we have the microbiome example, for example. So exactly, we have a specialized team analyzing that. Apparently the research is going really well. I mean, they're showing, for example, now correlations between different drugs we take and how it affects our microbiome. So how, of course, you take antibiotics, you're going to mess up with your microbiome as well in the intestine, which is going to affect your health further. So the more you take antibiotics, the more dangerous it actually is for you in long term. But it's not only related to antibiotics, it's related also to antidepressants we see now. So, and we know that a lot of our happy hormones, happy signals, serotonin, etc., they go through the gut. So you take antidepressants and you might actually harm yourself in a way and that we don't yet realize. So there's a lot of complexity there. And a little bit, another example then is my own work a little bit. My background is virology. So COVID was a really fun time. And now taking it further, what I want to do as a next step is collect all the nasal swabs I can from the biobank participants, because they go to public screening systems. Their nasal swabs end up in the system, and legally there's no reason not for us to take it. So we are allowed to take it because it's part of the same legislation. So trying to collect all the nasal swabs, trying to identify all the viruses they are interacting with throughout different years, because then you can also get the seasonality. And then you can also try to figure out then who are the people who are actually getting infected more often, which species are infecting them, what's affecting them, how it's affecting them in the long term. Trying to build out then like a virus biobank as well then on top of the health biobank. It's work in progress, some ethics there as well. I mean, everything we do has to be followed by the ethical rules. We have to apply for ethical approvals all the time. So that's just to mention. But that's where I'm trying to go as well myself.
Yeah, thanks for the question. No ethical questions with the trees, luckily. We can do so many things with them, and yet we don't need to struggle with those questions only in our heads. So yes, indeed, the trees and fungus, they are also a love story. Not quite as deep and dependent as the lichen, but still very, very important. And the question of how the mycorrhizal fungi, which is the symbiotic fungi of the trees, which help them to find nutrients in the soil, how they survive the urban environment is a big question. I think there are like some people that study that, but anything that goes below the soil surface is so hard. And it takes so much time and resources that people are just right now concentrating more on the above ground part. But it is a really important question to study, how much that some symbiosis can help the trees to survive in the urban environment. And then the macrofauna, there are studies not necessarily on their effects on the trees, but on the effects of the tree diversity on then the other fauna that it can support. So for example, I know people study these kind of fake worms that they put on the branches of the trees, and then they are able to calculate how much they are like predatory birds that come and pick on the fake worms, to know a bit more on whether, for example, tree diversity can support this bird population that can then again help the trees to combat this kind of defoliating worms, for example. So the whole kind of circle of biotic interactions is being studied, and it's super interesting also in the cities.
Can I ask a question? So, as far as I know, trees are releasing so-called exosomes, extracellular vesicles at all times, and in fact, all living creatures are secreting exosomes, and they have a kind of, let's say, information on the organism state. Are you studying exosomes, or could you? Because you were talking about volatile kind of organics, or I was thinking that you are addressing exosomes, but...
Yeah, I am not doing that. We are looking at the kind of communication or signaling aspects of the trees through these volatile organic compounds, which are then just like simple molecules emitted from the tree through the leaves or then below the soil in the roots. But that could be a really interesting field of study in itself, yes.
Yeah, because they are aerosols, and there's very much aerosol research at Helsinki University in anyway.
Yes, yeah. I think there is a little bit less of like biogenic aerosols in that sense of it being biogenic, but more of how biogenic molecules will affect the growth of aerosols and atmosphere.
Yes, lichens' relation to other organisms. Yes, like you said, reindeers is the first characteristic thing that comes to mind of many people. But when we go back to the inside of the lichens, then some years ago, good colleagues of mine established a new definition of lichen. So no longer like in old books, lichen is considered a symbiosis between the fungal part and algal partner. It's more of a holobient, a system with different microbes. And it has been also shown that types of actinobacteria are persistent in there that are specific to lichens. So there is very complex microbial things going on inside of the lichens. But with macroorganisms, there is also connections to humans. Humans have been using lichens for food, for medicine, etc. And birds use them for nesting. Slugs eat them and also distribute them. So, yes.
Do you study any of these connections, or?
For sure, because these microbial interactions require sequencing. So we are looking the microbial diversity inside of the lichens as well.
Okay, thank you everyone for your very fascinating presentations. I have one question for Erik, which concerns the map that you showed in the beginning of your presentation with the different gene samples all around the world. What really stood out for me in that map was that there are quite a substantial number of samples in the UK, in Finland, which was surprising for me, and actually not compared to those countries, not that many in, for example, in China or Japan, which I would have imagined that would have had more of these samples. So can you identify any reason why there are so many more samples in these laboratories or these banks in Europe as compared to other parts of the world?
Thank you. That's a question we're also been going around ourselves as well a little bit. So it's, again, as always, multifaceted. No simple answers here. One thing is the research environment. In Europe, it has been relatively open, and the society itself is usually very open to scientists as well. So it's easier to carry out those volunteer-based programs. And exactly, especially Estonia and Finland, for example, they are usually considered to be relatively science-trusting populations. So it's easy to run those projects. If you look at the map a little bit, zoom into Europe, other countries don't have those kind of biobanks. And usually it's related to governmental skepticism, or the larger the country, the harder it is to run those programs. So UK is slightly an outlier in Europe, but like Germans, even Sweden, like Swedes very often look at us like, how can you do this? How is this possible? Because I mean, just the legislation nightmare that we have to follow through just to get this done is insane. And that's why they don't do it very often. So that's one part. Like, we are just open to science, and it's just some decisions by the governments at some point to fund those kind of projects. China and Japan. Japan has appeared on the map recently. They have a few 100,000 samples, I think, or they're also growing. So they're an excellent collaborator as well. We do collaborate with them, because imagine if we find something in Estonia, I find something in Finland, we validate each other. But if you validate something with Japan, other side of the world, different genetics, different medical systems, different diseases, and it still validates, then it's human general phenomena that you're finding, maybe even more broader, not only species defined. So it's very cool if we can collaborate with them in that way, and that we do that a lot. China, they're not very public on what they're doing. Obviously, they are collecting samples. Obviously, they are sequencing samples. Obviously, they are studying those samples. They do have their biobanks. It's just no one else has access to it. We don't know what they're doing, how they're doing it. They're not publishing a lot. It's a bit of a mystery. Taiwan, on the other hand, is excellent at sharing their data as well. They have also their biobank. So it's, again, this openness topic. US, another one. Again, it's very state-defined. So different states and different hospitals have their own biobanks. There's nothing really centralized. The newer one that is really centralized is the Million Veterans Program. So it's related to the veteran data, because people in the army, they have to give their blood samples. They have to give the medical records. They are rigorously followed. And that's an excellent data source. So we do collaborate with them as well recently. Though, again, some different regulations here and there. And what we're actually missing now is Africa and Latin America, and Central Asia, India as well. We're missing the poorer countries of the world, because that's where a lot of the genetic diversity is in humans. It's just, that's actually one of the ways that the world is progressing now. We need to know everything besides the white average Europeans. What we're mapping right now, we need to know everybody else, actually. That would actually give us a lot more better picture of what's happening. I'm not sure if that answered.
That did. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask Pauliina one question. How to separate the psychological aspects and the fluency? And also, I would think that, let's say, if you try to analyze the fluency between Spanish and Finnish people, they would be rather different. How to quantify the fluency?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was maybe one part. I didn't comment on that much in my presentation, but definitely one element that can cause variation is related to these cultural differences and our cultural norms. So, of course, that influences things like to what extent we tolerate silence in interaction. There might be different kinds of rhythms, and these relate to these kinds of cultural differences that you mentioned. There are some studies on this, but there could definitely be more that would then nicely complement these more kind of individual focused aspects and these psycholinguistic aspects as well. So in the same way as we've been doing in other studies, we could then extend the measurements to other languages and other pairs of languages as well. So there are definitely a lot of new research areas still here related to this.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, first of all, thanks to all four of you for really nice and interesting presentations. I learned a lot today. My question is also to Pauliina. So towards the end of your presentation, you addressed the case of multilingual speakers and how fluency can be affected by that. And my question is that, so often we say or hear that the more you learn languages, the easier it gets. And so maybe intuitively we would think that it increases the fluency to just like know more and more languages. But on the other hand, the more languages you know, the more sources of confusion or like mix up in your brain can happen, and it might also lead you to have to think more about what word is it again, or like so more pauses, more corrections. Maybe you might also calc some syntax structure from another language into the language you are speaking, so it induces errors and so on. So is there any evidence of maybe something opposite to what is the intuition, that the more you learn languages, the less fluent you are in each of them? Or is there an optimum in the number of languages that you can master at the same time in a meaningful way? Or has it been investigated at all?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very intriguing and tricky question, I would say, to answer in a very straightforward way, because it depends so much on the context where you learn the languages and whether you acquire them from birth or then later on. So what type of multilingualism are we talking about? And then the specific language combination might also be a factor that affects this question. So are these the different languages that you know, are they related to each other typologically? So I guess the rule of thumb would be that it's easier or could be somewhat easier for you to learn if it's a typologically related language. So for us Finns, Estonian, for instance, would be relatively easy then to learn. But there are all kinds of other factors then that influence the learning process related to your individual characteristics, your motivation, why do you want to learn the language, these types of things. And then, of course, the kind of the external factors as well. Where do you use the language, and who do you use the language with? So I don't think we can give a kind of optimal number or anything like that. It's I'm a humanist. I would say that it's a very complicated question and it's very difficult to give a straightforward answer, unfortunately. But a lot of factors would have to be considered to really. But it's a very intriguing one, I have to say.
I once heard someone say that after 7 languages, then everything is easy.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Can I ask something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question also for you, Pauliina, because you were talking about this fluency in interactions or interactive fluency in language. Do you find ever that like the person you are interacting with will affect the fluency too? Because I feel like this is anecdotal, of course, but we tend to pick up the manners of a person we are interacting with. So does that have an effect also on the fluency?
Yeah, thank you. That's also a very, very good question and good point. And there is research to back this up, that we tend to influence each other in communication. So there have even been these kinds of studies that we might, for instance, rhythmically adapt our kind of the tempo of our speech to the other speaker's rhythm, and then kind of create the conversational rhythm together. And related to how we use our bodies, we might kind of mirror each other in interaction as well. So this might happen unconsciously, that we kind of adopt similar types of posture or similar gestures. So that these kinds of alignment behaviors are certainly very interesting, and something maybe that could also be studied more from this fluency perspective, because it's certainly the case that the pair dynamic is something that influences or can influence aspects of the speech fluency features as well. Yeah.
I guess this is adaptation then, or adjustment.
I was just thinking that, but I lived 7 years in Spain, so Estonian moving to Spain, it's a different culture.
Different culture.
And so, of course, I had to change my behavior. Now, what is that? Adaptation? Learning?
Yeah. So, please.
Yeah, I would have had a continuation question on Lasse's question here about this Japan and China. As you said, Erik, there is probably a lot of data in China, but that it isn't shared. And as a political scientist, I can't help to think of how these authoritarian regimes probably have a very smooth administration that allows you to collect data of people without maybe asking for permission in the same way as you do in Estonia or we do in Finland. And I was just thinking, as you said, they don't share this data, but if they would there be some sort of ethical, or what's the ethical takes on this in your field? Can you collaborate with data that comes from authoritarian regimes, or?
It's a really good question, but I think that goes back into general science ethics and the general accepted ethical agreements that we do have. If data is collected in any way that harms the rights of the people who own, at least in the biobanks we have in Europe, the people themselves own the data. It's not the government, it's not the biobank, it's the people themselves. If a person calls up the biobank, writes an application, delete my data, the data will be deleted. Authoritarian governments, they don't tend to have those types of rules, which means that we should not collaborate with them in any way possible because it's absolutely unethical to do that. So I would say no. As far as I know, no. It has to be volunteer-based. It only works volunteer-based.
And I have a continuation question on this question I already asked. How about then these commercial ones, like 23andMe or something? I'm not sure how the data, ownership works there, but...
Yeah, that's probably the fine print, and I'm not sure. I haven't read the fine print either. We do collaborate with 23andMe, though. And I know there is some rigorous process within the system just to approach that data. Usually we don't get access to the data itself. We just get the results of the analysis. We can request them to do an analysis and they bring it back to us. And they do report their results on 23andMe website, for example, somewhere in the back corner, oh, yep, we did this research using that data. And 23andMe, again, is volunteer-based. Nobody's forcing you to put your data in there. And also, it's not only the genetics that 23andMe gathers, it's also your health information. I'm part of 23andMe as well myself. They do ask you constantly, oh, were you sick? Did you have any new symptom? Are you allergic to peanuts? You just get those questions all the time. So it's volunteer-based again. So again, I don't have an issue there. As long as it's the volunteer basis and the rights have to be cleared up always. But the question is, what's happening now? 23andMe is almost bankrupt. They're getting very close to, they're barely swimming. So it looks like any day it's going to go down. What's going to happen to the data now? Is anybody going to buy it? Are they going to sell it to some big pharma? Are you going to be able to opt out from it? Like me as a volunteer, for example. I don't want to sell my data to GSK or whoever. There's actually researchers saying all around the world, let's buy it. Let's just, everybody put together all the money we have. We get the coolest data set in the world, essentially. It's just, the future is going to be interesting in that topic, I think. Hell, maybe China's going to buy it. Why not?
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah, perhaps the last question. Are there still? I think if you don't have, I have several. So let's say you said something very, very interesting. If I understood right, that it is easier to find people for biochemistry than for bioinformatics. Did I understand right?
Yeah, kind of. Like it's we are producing enough biologists, I think, and enough chemists, but we are actually lacking, in the future technologies, I think. And it's you need this interconnectedness between different fields, and we're not teaching that in the universities enough. I mean, we're not teaching bioinformaticians, at least in Estonia, as a separate field. We are teaching them in the school a little bit, here's bioinformatics, here's a course or two about it, but that's it. We need a lot more specialists. It's the same with the AI field, no? I guess, you need experts from all different types of fields, and they have to have some basic understanding of IT to make it work.
Yeah. So there was also one comment to Kaisa, because you emphasize the heterogeneity of the trees so let's say, do you see that machine learning or artificial intelligence could and neural networks could help in the analysis?
Yes, probably a lot, because we do have pretty good data set of satellite data, and then also this kind of LiDAR data, which is point clouds of the structures in the city. So then using those kind of big data sets to look for indication of stress in like optical signals that we can get from the tree canopy up to the sky, and try and understand in which spaces locally or spatially and at which times of years we do see changes. Those are probably data sets that could be used in that.
Yeah, I think it is, seeing the agenda is a lunchtime, and so let's say I think there are lots of topics to be discussed. Personally, I would love to have some discussion how you see researcher life at your stage. How promising you see it, what are the obstacles and these kinds of things, but let's say we can discuss in the lunch table. Thank you. Very nice talks. I really appreciate it.